Keep going, guys. Just keep going. There we go. I get it. Oh. Well, it's a delight to be with you all. I saw Toby do this. If he did it, I can do it, right? When I grow up, I want to be like Toby, so there you go. It's the first step. I'm delighted to be with you, and this morning was very rich. Last night was very rich. This morning, though, being reminded about, God doesn't panic with our honesty. I think, there's this weird dynamic where sometimes we think, we would never say it this way. Like if we ask, is God God? We're like, yep. But then it's kind of like a kid who has, a teenager has a good relationship with their parents, and they do something pretty significantly bad. And sometimes they don't want their parent to know, not because they're worried about getting in trouble, although that's part of it. Sometimes they don't want their parent to know because they don't want their parent disappointed in them or something. And it's interesting, very often that's how without realizing that's how we treat God. So we're really angry, and we're really sad, and we're really frustrated, and we have deep questions. But interestingly enough, you and I try and protect God. We try and protect God, and we try and keep all that stuff from him. But as soon as we say that, we're like, that's dumb. He knows everything. What are we doing? But it is true, and it makes it hard. So what I actually want to do now is I want us to think through, in light of this kind of swirl of complexity in life and our sin and our just normal natural limits, how do we think about these things in light of some of the anxiety that comes, in light of some of the challenge that comes? I really, in a sense, want to explore this question, right? I'm feeling anxious, I'm struggling maybe with sin. Whatever it is, why doesn't God just instantly fix it? Or even more personally, why doesn't he just instantly change me? Why not? So let's pray, and then we'll dive in. Father, you are good, and your mercies are new every morning. We thank you that our deep questions, our frustrations, our anger, our hurt does not scare you. But we need convincing afresh. Convincing afresh that you didn't just love us enough to save us, but you love us enough to keep us, to take us somewhere, to grow us through your Son and by your Spirit. So give us grace in ways that surprise. In the name of the risen King we pray. Amen. So because of what I do for a living, as a teacher and writing and that kind of thing, I get notes from folks. And they often are dealing with pretty difficult things. And they often ask really good, hard questions. They're not easy questions. They're questions that most of us have. But the truth is, if you're like me, many of us are just afraid to ask them. But maybe when it's by email, or maybe when it's a speaker you may never see again, you'll privately ask them something that you really don't want to get out publicly. Not too long ago, I remember receiving a note from someone who was dealing with an eating disorder. And they had been dealing with it for many years. It was incredibly painful. Some in this room might know it personally or through those that they love. And in this case, it was incredibly painful, causing, as you can imagine, all kinds of deep challenges for them, affecting not just their body, but their ability to work, to socialize, to feel safe in relationships. the struggle to feel known and loved. And part of what's so interesting about this, and if you're not familiar, you may not realize this, you might think, well, they just need to try harder. Maybe they don't want to be better or something. No, you don't understand. They so long to be, quote unquote, over this, to be done with it, and all the struggles that became associated with it. Maybe that's not your issue. Someone else talked to me about their struggle with pornography, or a feeling of being so self-absorbed you never actually relax when you're with others because you're constantly thinking about how they're perceiving you, how they're receiving you. So self-conscious. I don't know what your particular challenges and struggles are. Whether it's you find yourself dealing with anger where you're surprised, you're like, I don't know where this level of anger is coming from. You think you're fine, the kids do something, and you're like, I'm gonna kill you. You're like, where did that come from? Right? I don't know what it is for you. Maybe it's a laziness. And you think, tomorrow's gonna be different. And then you find 6-8 hours of YouTube later, just clicking, you're like, maybe I'll never be free from this. What is it? Now, here's the interesting thing. Whatever it is for you, do you think God likes when we hurt ourselves and others from our sin? Do you think he's like, that's awesome? I think we can agree, like, no. He doesn't delight when we sin and hurt ourselves and others. Does God want us greedy and lustful? So let's be honest about the question. If he doesn't think our sinning is a good thing, be honest, why doesn't he just change us? He's God after all. And here's the more troubling part for us. Because he doesn't just instantly change me, I'm tempted to think maybe he actually doesn't care. Or, just as troubling, maybe worse, maybe he doesn't know how hard it actually is. Maybe he doesn't get it. So what I want to do in our time together is I really want to think about 3 things in terms of God and our faith and what this looks like. I want to talk about process, funny enough. I want to talk about process, I want to talk about time again, and I want to talk about efficiency. Process, time, and efficiency, and think through them from a Christian perspective. So let's start with process. How many of you, do you guys know what kudzu is? Is that a thing here in Canada? So kudzu is this invasive plant. Well, it's invasive in the South, in Georgia, in different parts of the country, and in America. And it came from, I think it was Japan originally. And it was this great idea where it's like, let's bring kudzu to help with soil deterioration, right? It was one of those, no one thought about it, but there was nothing to stop it, and then it just took over. And it literally will just take over whole forest areas where the trees, everything gets covered with this, and it just starts to kill it all off. Well, anyways, that's what kudzu is. And I have a friend from Pennsylvania who's an artist, Jeff Morton. We'll call him Morty. And when he came to the South, for whatever strange, bizarre reason, he's one of my best friends, he got super interested in kudzu. And it became what he does so much of his artwork with. And so Jeffrey will go out. He will go and he will find himself in like a forest. He lives on Signal Mountain, which is right near Lookout Mountain where I live. And he'll go out in the woods all by himself, and he'll go and it'll be like, waist deep with kudzu everywhere, and then trees and everything. And he'll go out in the middle all by himself for hours and just sketch the kudzu and the trees, trying not to think about all the slithering things at his feet, right? Like, dude, what are you doing? Who knew being an artist took bravery, right? Took courage. But he will be on there. And now I don't know if you're like me, I don't know anything about art. So I'm like, how hard is that to be an artist? You just paint some stuff. Like, well, just right now, it's final exams. That's how I'm here right now. And I go back on Monday and I start to give and grade finals. And I always tell them, you're an artist. How do you grade finals? Pretty, ugly. Like, how do you? But anyway, so I'm ignorant, right? I know nothing. So I kind of think the way you paint is you're like, I see something and I put some colors on, you're good to go, let's do it. Apparently that's not how all real painters do it. I just didn't know. So anyway, so Morty, what he'll do is he goes out and spend all these hours, and then he'll take those sketches back to his studio, and he starts to draw them on a large canvas, and then over time, he will start to layer it with paint. And what's fascinating is he'll paint the thing, and then he scrapes it. And then eventually paint more. I mean, this is hours and hours. Often he'll keep track of his hours on this. And he'll say, yeah, that painting was 58 hours. Right? Now here's what's fascinating. His artwork has hung in the Nashville airport. It's hung in museums and businesses and in people's homes. And when you see his artwork, in a sense, I don't think you see all of the layers involved, but you can feel it. There is something about it. Now, why do I mention this? Because if you ask my friend Jeffrey what he wants his students to learn most, he will immediately say, process. Process. He wants his students to learn the process, and that process is as important as the finished product. That wonder and joy are to be discovered in the slow craft of producing artwork. And Morty mentors them in the promise and delight of development. Engaging in the slow, purposeful work, he offers an echo of the Creator's own careful craftsmanship. But let's be honest, we have difficulty valuing process. So this whole row will probably not know anything I'm about to say, and if you guys get it, it's going to make me happy and a little nervous. But some of the rest of you will. You guys remember AOL? It was in Canada too, right? Do you guys know about AOL? Yeah, okay. So anyways, this will be hard to imagine. So what happened with AOL? This is where we're starting with the internet. And it was really exciting. We had these modems, and you would go online to get email and stuff, and you would hear it. It actually used to make noise. And we're like, remember that? Like, why did it actually need to do that? Or was that like to tease us? But anyways, it would be real exciting because eventually it'd hook up. And then you'd like go to a web page and you wait, and it slowly loads. Now just imagine someone took away your internet and brought back AOL to you. How many people would die? Right? It would be like, and not just you guys would die, but you would be killing other people. You're like, no, right? It's real bad. And that was not that many years ago. Think about, you get a new phone now, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. 2 years later, 3 years later, like, I can't believe I'm so poor. I have a 3-year-old phone. It's so slow. Really? You get what I mean? How disturbing is that we think that's slow? And it's this, so in other words, speed is everything. We live in a culture of rapid download speeds and instant gratification. And so with similar impatience, we wonder, God, you're God, why don't you instantly change us? I get angry at the kids when I shouldn't. I'm trapped in self-absorption that never seems to end. My endless disordered desires feed my greed and my lust. Sin is not a past issue, but a present struggle for believers. And it takes great effort and perseverance not to give up. So we ask, when God extends his grace to our broken and needy lives, when he redeems us, why doesn't he also just immediately free us from all of our faults? When you became a Christian, why were your bad habits not just instantly erased and you were just given instantly a whole new set of virtues? If God doesn't actually like certain sinful attitudes and behaviors, again, let's be honest, why does it seem that God kind of stops with forgiving us? We're confident he forgives us. But is that it? Here's what I mean. Christians often deal with a lot of guilt and shame in our lives because of our continued struggle with disobedience and sin. We see how far short we fall from the finished product, and it weighs on us. Let me make this clear to you. Do you think when you wake up every morning, God's like, today's the day you're going to be faithful? And then by 9, 10, some of you are super righteous, 11:30, I don't know. That's just your awareness of sin. You probably did it at 6:30. You just you weren't paying attention, but whatever. However, make it. Do you then, at whatever time it is, God's like, oh my, I can't believe it. Is God just perpetually disappointed in us? But the next day, he's hopeful again. You get what I mean? Like, we don't put it that way. But we know God forgives us, but then is he just like, well, I forgave you, now I told you what to do, right? If clearly God doesn't enjoy our sin, how should we think about this? So, my kids, Jonathan's my oldest. Now he's in college, but when he was little, some of you remember doing this with kids, you've seen this happen with kids, that he was gonna learn to walk. Right? Remember that kind of stage? So what would happen is I'd get Jonathan and I'd stand him up, right? You guys know who Michelin Man was at the time? He looked like the Michelin Man at the time, right? So, yeah, he had thighs like you can walk, right? So anyways, put Jonathan up, he's next to the couch, and put an arm on the couch. And you remember, right? You go about 8, 10 feet away. Right, come on, Jonathan, come to me. Right? And you're like, hey, you can do it. Right? Remember that? But eventually what happens? He takes his hand off and he starts to walk. And then what happens? He hits the ground. And then what did I do? I went over to him and I said, Jonathan, you're an idiot. I don't understand. I clearly said, walk to me. What are you doing? Think of the psychological counseling bills we pay now. That's funny, except some of you might have been triggered by that. Whether it's because of ways you have, let's be clear, I didn't actually do that. But honestly, isn't that exactly how we think of God so often? We actually think God said, all right, I've forgiven you, and it's time for you to walk, and here are the commandments. Do you understand them all? Are you having trouble understanding the language here? No, I got it. Okay, walk. And then we actually think when we fall, God's like, I don't get it. What are you doing? Do you think it was irrelevant to me whether or not my son learned how to walk? I knew in his case he needed to learn how to walk. But I also knew he needed to develop muscles. He needed to develop balance. He needed to learn certain skills. I knew it was going to, the fact when you know what I actually did. You know exactly what I went over. I picked him up like, super traumatic. You're like, oh my gosh, that really had to hurt. He's like, yeah, really, right? And he was the firstborn, so I didn't know better. But for any of you with like firstborns, or this is future advice for this row right here, I remember like, honey, we cannot leave the house. Everyone will think we beat our children. Because he's learning to walk, and guess what happens when you learn to walk? You like bruise everything. I remember he cut his eye in the bathroom. I'm like, it looks terrible. No one can see this. And then we have a second child, we're like, oh, this is all kids. Forget it, everyone can see it, it's fine, right? It hurts. So I go to Jonathan, you kiss him, you love him, like, man, that is really hard. I'm so sorry. That was hard. You can do it though. You kiss him, you embrace him, you love him, and out of your compassion you set him down, and he looks to you for more courage. And I'm never standing there going, oh, I can't believe I've had to pick you up 10 times. No. We give the gift of courage. Well, when it comes to our Father in heaven, well, we would never want to admit it, we think very poorly of him. We seem to believe he expects us to be instantly flawless, to never make a mistake, to never fall back and hit the ground. As if God is surprised and frustrated, as if the holy, omniscient God is naive or ignorant about the ways that sin has so deeply affected us. Not even to mention just our normal, natural limits. We envision God as a temperamental father. And one of the ways you can figure out whether or not you and I think of God as a temperamental father is this. Do you think the Christian life is heavy and burdensome? Or is it hopeful and promising? Because that will tell you a lot about not just yourself, it actually tells us a lot about what we think about God. You know you got to live the Christian life. It's heavy, it's burdensome, but it's the right thing to do. Or is it hopeful? Is it promising? Is the Christian life to be endured, or is it to be enjoyed? Right? God designed us. He made us to be finite, like I said last night, limited. That's part of the good way he made us, limited in space, time. Limits also then point to growth and development. Part of what I want us to see this morning is how often we've disconnected our understanding of creation from redemption and sanctification. And it actually deeply affects us. We need to reconnect creation and recreation. The spirit of creation, the spirit who hovers over the chaotic waters in Genesis 1:2, the tohu lavohu, over these chaotic waters, the spirit who hovers over those waters to then bring about order, is the same spirit who hovers and then indwells in us. God values process. So let's talk about God taking his time. God takes his time. For whatever reason, we tend to associate God's work with finished products, right? Finished products, completed. But that's actually not what you find in the Bible a ton of the time. So let's think about this. I can't help but ask questions. I'm a professor. That's what I do most of the time, right? So how fast can God do something? Can he do it that fast? I can't even snap fast enough, right? I mean, can we just agree God can do something as fast as he wants? Can everyone agree on that? It's like, yeah, Kapic, give me a hard question. So we believe that God is the sovereign Lord and creator of all things. And if we believe God could have made everything in a millisecond or faster, here's what's interesting. Because I actually believe, I'll just be honest with you, I strongly believe that evangelicals have a weak or underdeveloped doctrine of creation. Evangelicals have a weak, undeveloped doctrine of creation. You're like, I don't understand what that sentence means. I don't know what I'm at. Here's what I mean by that. Because sometimes evangelicals say, we talk about creation all the time. For the last 150 years, when you think we're talking about creation, the doctrine of creation, what are we almost always and only talking about? How old is the earth, and how did God do it? We've reduced the doctrine of creation to those question of origins. How did he do it? When did he do it? I'm not going to say there's no relevance to those questions, but they are not the most important. And the problem is we've reduced the doctrine of creation to those questions, and it actually has negative consequences for your life. So let me help you understand what I mean by this. Let's get back to this. Think about creation. Now, there are some Christians who follow Archbishop James Ussher. Some of you may know the name James Ussher. From 1650, Ussher, trying to use his Bible, told us exactly when the earth came into existence. I can tell you, if you don't know, here you go. I'm going to tell you, ready? Well, let me get the date exactly right. Yeah, October 22nd, 4004 BC. And to this day, there are Christians who hold that, or some Christians would say, no, it was 10,000 years. But then you have other Christians who will say, the earth is 4 billion trillion years old, whatever. Now, 4004 BC, 4 trillion years old, are those the same? Those aren't the same. But what's interesting for our purpose right now is I want you to see, actually, there's no real difference in this way. You can have those debates if you want, but for our purpose, here's what I want all of us to see, because it doesn't actually matter to me where you're at on that continuum. Everyone on that continuum, if you're a Christian, has to believe that God could have made it that fast. So whether or not he made the world in 6 literal 24-hour days, or 7, or it's 6 trillion, interestingly enough, as different as those seem, both of those views have to agree that the God who could have made it like that didn't. That's interesting. That actually tells us something from the very first chapter of Genesis, that God has always valued process. God has always been comfortable taking his time. He doesn't tend to do things instantaneously. He takes days. The Creator apparently enjoyed creating, shaping, sustaining what he made. He slowly interconnects all the various parts. In the Genesis narrative, it's very artistic the way God creates a space, and then he'll eventually fill the space. It's all, he takes his time, he interconnects things, he values process. And what do you know? Forget all the debates. Let's just imagine you've heard none of the debates before, and you only start to read in Genesis 1. You'll come to 2 conclusions if you read, you'll come to more, but these 2 you have to get. If you only read Genesis 1, I'll just give you the first so we don't get, God made it, okay? But try and remember, what's the other thing that if you actually read Genesis 1, you cannot miss? It's said again and again and again. What? It's good. God works, and then he's like, oh, do you guys see this? This is amazing. And then it worked. It's like, oh, this is so good. It reminds me, G.K. Chesterton has this isn't in my talk, but apparently if I come over here, the time doesn't count. It's fine. So that's how it works. And I fly out today, so you can't be mad. G.K. Chesterton has this great discussion where he talks about God being the youngest of all. And it's weird because this could sound really crazy. But here's what he means, right? Think about when you get a little kid, right? And you go, whether it's your child or like you're babysitting so you have more energy. Okay, you guys go to someone's house and there's this little kid, like a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and you get down on all fours. What do they immediately do? They jump on your back because you're a what? You're a horse. And then what do? No, you guys are nice. What do you actually do? You buck them off. It's super fun, which they love, right? So you start to buck them off, and then they go flying, and they hit the ground, and what do they immediately do? Say, do it again. And the reason why I'm talking about you guys is the parents are like, no, one was enough. That really hurt. But you guys were like, I'll do it 28 more times. Here's what's brilliant about what Chesterton's trying to get at. It takes a child that's like, do it again. Do it again. And Chesterton says, God, in a sense, is so filled with that youthful delight that every day, God is the one who calls up the sun. And every day, God's like, can you believe this? This is amazing. Do it again. Every day, God's like, this is awesome. Let's do it again. God likes process. And he thinks what he's done is really good. The problem with sin is not that his creation is bad. The problem is it's distorting his good creation. God does not hate you. He hates the sin that is distorting the good creation he made you to be. And sin is that which is distorting you and turning you away from him and a right relationship with your neighbor and the earth. After each day, God says it's good. Adam was shaped, as it says, of the dust of the ground. God is clearly building his creation with purpose and care. And he doesn't seem to panic by process. Think about this in terms of our lives. He who began a good work in you will what? He'll carry it to completion. Do you not feel in your life sometimes you're like, God, I did it again. And we kind of feel like God's like, hey, listen, I forgave you. I brought the treasure out. But look, you're coming back again. I'm running low here. I forgave you one time. I forgave you 20 times. I forgave you 50. But hey, we're about, right? I was talking, Fred, who is here with the bookstore, he and I were in seminary together and down in Orlando, Florida. Because of that, those connections in Orlando, my wife and I will occasionally go down there. And I think it was right around 2007, 2008, there was this, right near the highway, there's this skyscraper that started to be built. And I'm not an expert, but I think it qualifies as a skyscraper. I want to say it's about 10 stories high, pretty big. And what's amazing, I don't know if it's a stock market crash in 2008, I'm not sure what exactly, all I know is it has remained in the state it is to this day. There are no windows on it. It is definitely a skyscraper. Millions have definitely been put into it, and it remains unfinished. Isn't that you sometimes meet a young couple who's like, we're going to build a house, and they haven't actually counted the cost. Is that our view of God? God got real excited. He's like, I'm going to save you. I'm going to save you, Susanna. And you're like, great. And then after you've been a Christian for a few years, like, God, I don't think you understood what you were getting. I'm more expensive than you knew. Is that God going, oh, Kelly, I thought you were a Honda. I didn't know that you were a Buick. I don't know anything about it. I don't mean to offend anybody. I don't know, But I thought you were this, and you're just this junk car. Like, you sin all the time. I just thought I was going to have to put a little bit of money into this thing. I didn't know it was going to cost. Is that God's situation? No, it's out of the depths of his treasures and love. He is committed. He will never forget you and I. He will see us through. It may be hard for us in the process to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep seeking Christ, to resist sin. But in this hard process, God is doing something. He is molding and shaping us to become more and more like Christ. So now let's think about the last one, efficiency. Here's the question. Is God efficient? Is God efficient? Church buildings, we're in a church right now. Think about church buildings, right? They can be designed in all kinds of ways. I was just in Dallas not too long ago, and there's a church there, and they're debating because there's a lot of growth, and they actually have no place for people to gather that's not actually in a sanctuary. And so they're debating, do we build this other thing, right? These are all, and before this was built, I'm sure you have these legitimate debates. And one of the things that Christians, and I care a lot about poverty alleviation, I've written about it, involved in it, but one of the things that Christians we legitimately ask is like, why the high ceilings? Why the nice wood on the, right? Let's just make our church as basic as possible so we could give all the money away to missions and to those who are material. Those are legitimate, important questions. Think about it. Like, yeah. How would this room feel if we had, because you only need 8-foot ceilings. How would that feel if you just had 8-foot ceilings here? It's so fascinating because if the only thing you value is efficiency, we get hurt by all kinds of other things. The weight of it. There are things we don't appreciate. One of the questions is this space indulgent? What about these non-essential architectural extras? Here's the definition of indulgent. Having or indicating a tendency to be overly generous or lenient with someone. I'm not actually here to say, what you should think about the church, although I hope you get a sense, like, I think it's legitimate for us to have space to breathe. But this relates to our theology. Here's the actual question. Is God too generous with the design of his creation? Is God too indulgent with us? I don't actually want to get into a debate about the word indulgence or how we should think about it, but stay with me on this. Historians of architecture and social critics have now, there's a lot of data, a lot that we've gathered, that what has happened is when you only take into account the idea of efficiency as the only criteria guiding your construction of buildings, especially housing, the unintended consequences are huge. We lived in London for 3 years. We lived near, and you have these all over in America too, but we lived right near this housing complex, and it was made for materially poor people. And it was this massive, pure concrete structure. And the ceilings were low, and all the walls inside were the same color, and it was indoor-outdoor carpeting, and it was all cinder block, and it felt like a lead blanket constantly on you. Oh, it was efficient. It was efficient. But where is the life? Where is the beauty? Where is the love in the process? Efficiency at times in some of this can suck out life where beauty can give life. Here's what's fascinating to me. And I know Canada culturally is a bit different, but you can tell me later how different it is. But certainly in America, we think efficiency is everything. And here's what's surprising. God's highest value is not efficiency. God's highest value is not efficiency, especially when you're consider it in some kind of mechanistic sense. You know what God's highest value is? It's love. God is more interested in beauty than the speed of process. He's more concerned to lift our gaze and to provoke a song, to stimulate our imaginations than he is to just get things done. I don't think God is wasteful. I don't think he's negligent, but he's purposeful and wise. He's patient and intentional. Think about it. I just want to make sure you're getting this. Like, honestly, well, I'm not critiquing any of you, I don't know. But I guarantee there's a lot of homes in here, a lot of you represent homes where in your house, every room is white. I don't blame you for it. One of the great things, if you paint every room white, you just get one bucket of paint, and whenever there's a problem, you paint it. It's not a big deal. It's super efficient. We can all agree on that. So here's the interesting question. Why didn't God just create the whole world out of like gray and black? Just think of how efficient that would have been. Why didn't he make it that way? Just a single color, shades of black and white. Someone shaped by the modern industrial mindset might negatively assess God as indulgent, as wasteful, as excessive. Here's what I mean by it. Think about it. Think of the extravagance of a peacock's feathers. Think of the careful complexity of an orchid, the multi-layered nature of the human voice, the transcendence of an orgasm. I know each of those things you could come up with reasons to explain why they are what they are, but actually all of them are extravagant. God is the one who made them. He loves what he's doing. Is it necessary to have so much color, so much diversity, so much depth, so much wonder? Yes, because God is not driven by efficiency alone. Love, beauty, wonder, worship are God's main goals. Sometimes God is astonishingly efficient in his work. God can just go, water your wine. He can make a dead person rise instantly. But because he is compelled by love rather than merely getting things done, he normally takes slower routes. Exodus normally takes time. It calls for faith and growth. Process has always been part of the normal pattern. Rather than snapping his fingers, the Father, through the Word, sends the Spirit over the darkness, hovering above the turbulent waters, bringing order out of the emptiness and void. But those of us in the West really do struggle with this, partly because of our disproportionate value on efficiency and productivity. I mentioned some sociological observation about Africa yesterday, and again, many countries, lots of cultural diversity there. But Gary Selby, in a different book, he's an American who is a college professor and took a group of students to West Africa. And part of it was them to be involved in observations and learning from the process. And so he'd send them out and do different things. They were involved in the community and different things. And early on, visiting there, one evening as they were debriefing, some of the students were kind of excited because they thought they figured something out, and they had some things to say. And basically what happened was they were describing these 3 or 4 guys who did the work that they were convinced just one person could do. And they felt very clever, very confident. It was like, it was so wasteful. It was so inefficient. They could have just had one person doing that, and the others could have been off doing something else. And they described what they saw as, quote unquote, backward, as inefficient. And Selby, actually, who's spent a lot of time there, said, it's not that efficiency is not a value in East Africa, but it's not what's most cherished there. The question is, what were they witnessing? Was it really just laziness? Was it really moral failure? Could it have been a different structure where things like friendship and community are more prized and cherished? How do we think about these things? Well, I will just tell you, I don't want to glorify one culture over another because sin has affected all of our cultures in different ways. But I will just tell you, I am so soaked in my DNA, in my instincts from birth. I love efficiency. I love productivity. And it's been required a lot of self-examination for me to wrestle with the fact that God values those things, but they're not his highest value. Love, community, growth of character are often, though not always, at odds with efficiency. God's always known that. He's always, let me make sure you're understanding this. Do you hear, because you might be like, Kapic, why are you so against productivity and efficiency? I'm not, but here's the challenge. Do you know what's probably the most inefficient thing you can do in the world? Love. Right? Love. It is. You don't know it until you do it. Try having a baby. Right? Where you kind of think, we have this great life. We're just going to have a baby. It's just going to be awesome. We're just adding the baby to it, right? Is that how it works? Try just getting a puppy. When you love your puppy, I remember my wife and I grew up with babies. We grew up with puppies, with dogs. And then for the first 20 years of our marriage, we didn't have any dogs. And then we were dealing with some pretty serious sickness and stuff. And for whatever reason, I thought, this is a good idea. And I just remember when Ruby was a puppy. My wife and I, on the ground with Ruby in the middle of the night, just crying, why did we get this puppy? I cannot sleep. Ruby helped my wife, who had been in bed basically for 2 years, get out of bed. Love is inefficient. But it's what God does. The artist, the author, they'll tell you that efficiency is often the enemy rather than the friend of creativity and process. The Almighty Creator, however, has always remains comfortable prioritizing love and growth over efficiency and check marks. So let me conclude. Do not lose heart. It's easy for you and I to grow discouraged. We look at our lives and we see how far short we fall from what we wish we were like. We see our sins and just our limits. We wish that our ongoing struggles with troublesome attitudes, with our addictions, with our actions, we wish these things would immediately end. Yet God does not. I've seen it. I've seen someone who's an alcoholic, God, boom, they're not an alcoholic anymore. But that is not what I've seen how God normally works in the lives of Christian alcoholics. I've seen addiction, but that's not his normal way. Interestingly enough, it's process, which tends to mean to get through that addiction, you need others. And that's inefficient. It's just also gospel. Because the Spirit unites us to Christ and the Spirit unites us to one another. Ordinarily, God changes our lives by persistently picking us up when we fall and slowly, consistently drawing us into the love of the Father, the grace of the Son, and the fellowship of the Spirit. And He, in the process, and this is key, He reconnects us with others and replaces our callousness with compassion, our hatred with love, and our fears with hope. Do not lose heart. He who began a good work in you will see it to completion. Don't forget that God most often chooses to do this by slow but consistent work in our lives through the church. The church matters, His people. Never forget the triune God values process. He takes His time because He's driven by love. He, no matter how you feel right now, he will not let you go. Perseverance of the saints is fundamentally about the perseverance of God. Take heart. Let's pray. Our God, we belong to you. And we need you to take responsibility for our lives. We need you out of the depth and riches of your grace and mercy to continue to apply the ointment, not just of forgiveness, but of life, of self-control, of growth, of grace, of compassion, of healing. Lord, I don't know these folks, but you know my heart, you know their hearts, you know the cracks and crevices in their lives where they desperately need grace, where they desperately need the courage to stand up again and try and walk. Would you convince us by your Spirit that you have not just left us alone now once we've come to believe. You've not left us alone, but you're with us and for us. Give hope where it is absent. Give faith where it is, if not gone, just barely flickering. Give love where it feels hard. We don't have confidence in ourselves, but we do have confidence in you. So please continue to help us see the work you're carrying on, that we will not lose heart. It is in the name above all names we pray. Amen.